Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Delivering Strategic Advantage Through Integrated Risk Management, brought to you today by Dr. David Hillson, or as he is also known, the Risk Doctor. Thank you for taking time out and being here today. I'm Jenny Ritson-Smith, Marketing Manager here at Risk Connect, previously known as SOAR GRC, and I will be your host for today. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We'll be running a live Q&A at the end of the webinar, so I've enabled our Ask a Question feature. If you have any questions, just pop them in there and we'll try and select a few at the end. If we don't have any time, we'll come back to you offline and pick them up then. If you miss anything, don't worry, we'll be sending around the on-demand recording when it's available. With all that covered, I would like to introduce you to our presenter today, Dr. David Hillson. David is an internationally recognised speaker, leader and expert thinker in all things risk management. As many of you will know, we have been working with David over the last year on a series of always really well attended and received webinars. If you were not lucky enough to catch them the first time around, you can find previous recordings on our website under www.sword-grc.com/webinars. Like sessions prior to this, I'm sure you'll find it all really interesting and really engaging. With all that covered, I will hand you over to David, who will take you through today's session.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Hello, everybody. I'm David Hillson, the Risk Doctor, and I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share some ideas with you about how to use risk management to deliver strategic advantage, and in particular, talking about integrating risk management and not seeing it as something standalone or separate or technical, but taking a broader view of risk management than perhaps you might have been used to in the past. So I'm going to get straight on with it. I hope you'll find this interesting and useful. And as Jenny says, please post your questions at the end and we'll do our best to address them. So if we're talking about delivering strategic advantage through integrated risk management, there's a couple of obvious questions. What do we mean by strategic advantage and what do we mean by integrated risk management? And then how do they link together? How are they related? So that really forms the structure of the presentation. And I hope you'll just follow through. It should be fairly logical as we go through. So we'll start with the idea of strategic advantage. And it's important for us, especially those of us who work in the world of projects and programs and portfolios, to keep our eye on the prize, on the big purpose for why we're doing what we're doing. And we're all in business and in projects for creating strategic advantage, because strategic advantage is about getting the best possible performance so that we can beat the competition. And we get it through being smarter, faster, cheaper, better, different than the competition, essentially through innovation. And the question is how risk management can help us to do that. And that's been part of my mission for, I guess, about 30 years, to help us use risk management for practical advantage to deliver better projects, better programs, better business, better outcomes, and ultimately to change the world. So that's what we're about. And I'd like to start by suggesting that we could see our organizations as a hierarchy of objectives. So if we perhaps impose some kind of structure on this hierarchy, at the top you'll have strategic level objectives, which are delivered through a set of intermediate level objectives, perhaps portfolios and programs, functional and so on. And then at the bottom level, we have a kind of working level of projects and operations. And across the organization, the objectives need to be coherent, so they're all make sense together as a whole, but also they need to be aligned. They all need to be pointing in the same direction. And to do that, we need to define our objectives top down. So we start by defining the strategic purpose of our organization through the vision and the mission. Then we ask, how are we going to deliver that? And we'll deliver that through a series of functions, through a series of portfolios, a range of high-level objectives which say how we create the mission. And then we'll ask, well, how do I execute my portfolio or my functions? And below that, we have another level. Perhaps we might call it a program level or a departmental level. And then below that, how do we deliver those? And that's through projects and operations. And then we fulfill our objectives bottom up. By doing effective operations, effective projects, effective functions, then we deliver our portfolio, program, functional, departmental objectives, and ultimately deliver our strategic goal. So if we ask the question, what is business for? Then we might get a range of different answers. If we were live, I would ask you this, and you would be calling out things like businesses are for creating deliverables or products and services that people want and need. Business is for creating benefits. And of course, you're right. But there's a higher level set of answers that you might give me if I ask what business is for. You might say we're here to create profit and to reinvest that in the business. We're here to learn how to do our business better and make sure that we're continually improving. We're here to capture experience and use the experience of the past to benefit the future. And these two sets of answers are both correct, but they're at different levels because businesses exist for two key purposes. There are a set of tactical purposes to create and deliver deliverables that deliver benefits, but there's also a set of strategic purposes, and we need to be sure that the things we do at the tactical level contribute to achieving our broader business objectives. Which brings us to the question of why do we do projects and operations, things at the lowest level of our organization? We do projects and operations to create deliverables. But that's not the purpose of a project. A project is there to help us deliver successful programs, and programs create outcomes. And programs are there to contribute to portfolios which deliver benefits to our customers and our stakeholders. And portfolios and benefits exist to help us achieve our organizational strategy and fulfill the vision. And so we see that projects contribute ultimately through this chain to strategy, and the same is true of operations and functional tasks. So then we might ask the question, why do we need to manage risk, for example, on our projects at the lowest level? Effective risk management delivers more successful projects, and we'll see why in a moment. But if through managing the risk on our projects, the projects that we have are more successful, they're delivering our deliverables more effectively, then those more successful projects will contribute to more successful programs and better outcomes. And more successful programs will give us more successful portfolios and create more benefits, which ultimately will give us, yes, you guessed it, a more successful strategy for the overall business. And by putting risk management in place at the project or the operational level at the lowest possible level, and then seeing that cascade upwards through the organization, through that hierarchy of objectives, then managing risk at the lowest level of the organization will help us to make sure that ultimately we deliver the vision and the objectives, the strategy of our business. So we might summarize that by saying, well, actually, effective risk management, wherever you implement it, is ultimately about creating more successful strategy, more successful business, fulfilling the overall strategic vision. And if I just go back a moment to where we were here, what we need is to make sure that our risk management supports every level, that it's not just risk management at the lowest level. Project risk management is okay, but of course our programs and portfolios and our strategy are equally risky, and we need to be able to manage risk at each of these levels. And it starts at the bottom and cascades upwards. But what we need to do, as we'll see later on, is to make sure our risk management is effective right across the board if we're going to have successful strategic delivery. So it's really important that we make our risk management effective. Our projects and businesses will only deliver the full value and the strategy if we can understand and manage risk properly. If we're not thinking straight about risk, if we have a limited view of risk, then our management of risk will be ineffective. And sadly, many of us, when we're doing risk management, have these kind of blinders or blinkers on, and we see what we see, but we don't see other things other than where our focus is, because our concept of risk is limited. Perhaps we see risk as only for projects, or only for technical, or only for health and safety or insurance. If we have a very limited view of risk, then we're never going to manage the full spectrum of risk effectively and then make sure we can deliver the vision of our organization strategically in a proper way. So it's really important that we think about having a proper concept of risk so we can have effective management of risk. Talking of management of risk, what do we mean by risk management? Let's just have a very quick reminder of what we mean by risk management. And to do that, we need to start by what we mean by risk. And perhaps you'll have seen pictures like this just making you think that risk is a big, bad, ugly thing that's threatening you. It's going to pound down on you and squash you horribly. Risk is the sort of thing where you have a target painted on you and somebody's going to be firing bad things at you and you better be very, very careful. Or there's just some big dark shadow out there in the future which is just waiting to get you as soon as you put your toe in the water. I'd like to say that this is a limited concept of risk. It's not completely wrong, but it's not certainly a full view of what risk really is. So what do we really mean by risk? I guess we all know that risk is something to do with uncertainty, but risk is not the same as uncertainty. All risks are uncertain, sure, but not all uncertainties are risks. There are billions of uncertainties in the world, but we don't write them all down in our risk registers or try and manage them through our risk process. We filter that world of infinite uncertainty and we create a subset of uncertainty which we call risk, which we need to think about and prepare for and try and manage and report on and involve other people in. So risk is not the same as uncertainty. Risk is a subset of uncertainty. I use three words to define that subset. Risk is uncertainty that matters, because most of the uncertainties in the world don't matter. There are all sorts of things that might or might not happen that we just don't care about. Why not? Because they can't affect our objectives. Anywhere in that hierarchy of objectives, from projects and operations at the bottom right up to strategic vision, if there's an uncertainty that can affect us, one of our objectives somewhere in that hierarchy, we need to know about it. We need to think about it. We need to understand it. We need to define it and characterize it so we can manage it. And then we need to report on it and communicate about it. Those are the things that we call risks, the uncertainties that matter, and they matter because they can affect our objectives. So risk is uncertainty, but it's also uncertainty that has an effect on our objectives. And we have then two dimensions of risk, an uncertainty dimension that we might call probability or frequency or likelihood or chance. We have an effect on objectives dimension that we might call impact or consequence or result. And we need to make sure that we think about both of these sides of risk when we're considering our risk exposure. Now, anyone who's heard any of my other presentations is probably familiar with this picture of the mouse and the cheese, just to illustrate the kinds of impact that we need to think about. The mouse has spotted the threat of the trap, and he knows that he could be killed or injured. So he's doing his risk management to make sure that he minimizes the chance of that happening by going very carefully, and he minimizes the possibility of a really bad outcome by protecting himself with his little helmet. Good mouse. That's what we all need to do. Go carefully and protect ourselves, right? But there's another kind of impact that the mouse is interested in. It's the cheese. He wants to get the cheese off the trap, and that's not certain. What he needs to do is to create or capture the positive outcome of the effect on his objectives, which is not only to avoid springing the trap and being injured, but also to get the cheese out. And he has to do both of those things at the same time. And the challenge for risk management is to make sure that we get as much cheese out whilst really minimizing the chances of being killed or injured in our projects or our business. And there's always a better way to do that. So let's just think about these two different types of impact. When we're thinking about our projects, programs, portfolios, or strategy or business, what kind of impacts are we interested in? If risk is uncertainty that matters, what impacts matter? And it's the case that we're not only interested in uncertainties that could hurt us, we also want to know about uncertainties that could help us, work smarter, faster, cheaper, that could improve performance or reputation, that could help us to achieve our goals in the best possible way. So of course we need to manage uncertainties that could hurt us, but we also need to manage uncertainties that could help us get to our goals in the best possible way. So uncertainties that matter include bad things, of course, but uncertainties that matter also include good things. There is upside risk as well as downside risk. So managing risk not only means preventing potential problems and trying to stop things going wrong with our little helmets and going very carefully, it also means getting as much cheese out of our projects and programs and business as possible, finding potential benefits and helping things to go as right as possible, getting the cheese, which of course represents products and services that people want and need, deliverables and outcomes, benefits. We want to maximize our cheese whilst minimizing our traps. And so that means that if we think about uncertainties that could help us as well as uncertainties that could harm us, we need to be thinking about opportunities as well as threats. So in our thinking about risk, we need to broaden our concept to make sure we don't just see risk as a bad thing. Some risk is good for you. And so what we need to do is manage both upside and downside risk. And this idea of double-sided risk is included in all of the international standards. So if we just think about at the project level, the Project Management Institute's lexicon of project management terms, it defines risk as uncertainty that matters, an uncertain event or condition that if it occurs affects objectives. But they've added 3 words, cheese and traps. Well, not cheese and traps. What they've said is that a risk is an uncertain event or condition that if it occurs has a positive or negative effect on objectives. And you'll find the same in the ISO 31000 standard. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, but then it says the effect could be positive or negative or both, and could include opportunities as well as threats. And you'll find the same in all of the standards that you might care to read. So we have this idea that risk is a broader concept than just uncertain negative events. Risk is about positive things that could help us as well. Risk includes both opportunities and threats. Well, I hope all of that is background revision that you're familiar with, but I wanted to make that point really clear when we're thinking about risk management. If risk management is a forward-looking radar that scans the future, tells us what's coming in our direction, looking for approaching uncertainties, it's not just looking for the big bad things that we need to avoid or protect ourselves against. It's also looking for the big good things that are coming in our direction that we might want to steer towards to make sure that we can capture them and exploit their benefits for our projects and our businesses. So risk management is about making sure we minimize our threats and maximize our opportunities. And risk management quite simply involves a simple process, which is asking and answering 6 basic questions. What am I trying to do? What could affect me doing it? Which of those things are most important? Once I know the most important things that could affect me, the big risks, the worst threats and the best opportunities, what can I do about it? Then I do that and see if it worked, and then I tell people, and then I find out what's changed. This is the risk management process. 6 simple questions. One leads to the next. And we put those questions into a formal process, something like this. You might have come across, you might have slightly different terms for your stages of the process, but essentially we start with defining what's at risk. That tells us what we're trying to achieve, identify the risks that might affect us, find the big ones through an assessment or analysis phase, plan our responses by thinking about what we could do to affect those big risks, implement our responses, which is doing it, and then monitor and review, seeing if our responses worked and finding out what's changed. And of course, it's a cyclic process. So that's what risk management is about. But what do I mean by integrated risk management? I'd like to suggest in this presentation 3 types of integration that we need to consider if we want our risk management to be as effective as possible in delivering successful projects, programs, portfolios, and ultimately delivering strategic advantage. And I'd like to think about internal integration, horizontal integration, and vertical integration within our risk management approach. Internal integration within the risk process itself, making sure it's an integrated risk process. Horizontal integration, integrating risk management with other processes. And vertical integration across all levels of the business. So let's think about those 3 in turn. And we're going to have to be quite brief here, otherwise we'll spend all day. And we could spend all day talking about these things. And I have spent all day talking about these things, but not today. So what do we mean by internal integration? Here's that simple risk management process we introduced a moment ago, which answers the 6 questions. If we want to have an internally integrated risk process, we need to make sure that we're handling all kinds of uncertainty, both positive and negative. And the good news is this same risk process, which answers these 6 questions, works perfectly well for upside risk and downside risk. It's equally applicable to threats and opportunities. We just need to refocus some of the parts of the process, and in particular, 3 changes. The 3 changes around identifying, analysing and responding to risk. Because if we want to manage upside risk, the first question is, well, what are those upside risks? We need to think in our project, in our risk brainstorms, what might help us? What uncertainties could occur in the future that would help us achieve achieve our goals. And the same is true at project, program, portfolio, and strategic level, identifying uncertainties using brainstorms and checklists and specific techniques like SWOT analysis, thinking about what's happened in the past and learning lessons from the past, what went well before and what could we do again. All sorts of positive things need to be part of our risk identification. And some of those ideas will be stupid things, will never really happen. Some of them will be golden opportunities. So we need to rank our opportunities through the assessment process or the analysis process, which are the very best opportunities. And we can use probability impact matrices in the same way. How likely is the opportunity to happen and how good could it be? And so we can prioritize our opportunities through that kind of approach, or using quantitative analysis, for example, and modeling the effect of upside risk on our overall outcomes. And once we've found some great opportunities, we need to plan some risk responses. How can we make them happen? And like with threats, we would avoid or transfer or reduce our threats. With opportunities, we can exploit them or share them or enhance them. So we're finding matching kind of responses that will help us to capture those opportunities and create additional benefits for our projects, programs, portfolios, and business. And you'll see in these simple ways, we can transform or extend our risk management process to integrate our handling of both threats and opportunities within a single process. Some people think that you need a separate opportunity management process, which you don't. Risk management manages risks. And risk management manages both upside and downside risks. And our first challenge for internal integration, to have integrated risk management within the risk process, is to make sure that our risk process not only minimizes threats, but also maximizes opportunities to give us the best possible chance of achieving our objectives. So hopefully that's obvious. If you recognize that risk includes positive as well as negative, upside as well as downside, opportunities as well as threats, you'll want to make sure that your risk management process is internally integrated to address both sides of the risk challenge. And that's what internal integration means. Now, what do we mean by horizontal integration? Horizontal integration is integrating risk management with other processes. I'd like to start by thinking about project management processes, but the same applies to all management processes. Let's just think about project management. Every project management process aims to manage risk. I was part of the team that created the last but one edition of the PMI PMBOK guide. And I've helped to produce the risk chapter for the last 20 years, actually, since the 2000 edition of the PMBOK guide. We keep asking the question, where does risk feature in the other chapters? And what we found was that every chapter, every part of the project management process has something to do with managing risk. So why do we produce a project schedule? We produce a project schedule to tell us how long things will take and work out where the uncertain areas are within our project by doing critical path analysis, by looking at the time risk within the project. And the idea of thinking hard about project scheduling is to understand and reduce the risk exposure of our overall project schedule. Why do we do estimating? We do estimating to understand the uncertainties in the costing, in the budget. And why we do estimating and create a structured budget using work packages and so on is to reduce our cost risk. Talking of work packages, why do we produce a work breakdown structure? The work breakdown structure reduces scope risk. We know what's in the project and not in the project. That uncertainty is managed through our work breakdown structure. We plan resources in order to reduce resource risk. We report and communicate with our stakeholders to reduce stakeholder engagement risk, and so on. Every project management process is designed to manage the standard uncertainties with managing projects. And the same is true with programs and portfolios and functions and departments and tasks. All of those other areas, the risk management approach, the standard management approach, is looking to tackle standard risks. Standard operating procedures tackle the common risks, the risks that could affect all our projects or most of our projects across our organization, what we might call business as usual risks. So if management processes are aiming to manage some kind of risk, the common risks which could affect us in our normal business, why do we need risk management? What's the point of doing risk management if everything else is about managing uncertainty? The point is that the standard operating procedures tackle common risks. Risk management is there to tackle the uncommon risks, the ones that are not addressed in our standard processes, the one that no one has ever thought of before or seen, the one that it isn't in anyone's job description to deal with, ones that otherwise would not be considered and would be missed. What we need to do is to think about not just the business as usual risks, but all the other uncertainties that could affect us. And that's where risk management comes in. But to achieve our goal, risk management needs to come out of the risk silo. It needs to be integrated in all of those other processes. So when we find an uncommon risk, some uncertainty that nobody had thought of, it's not included in our standard operating procedures, we need to do something about it that will affect the way that we operate our normal management process. We need to use the results of our risk process to inform our standard management decisions. So we find some time-critical risk that isn't addressed in the standard schedule, we need to make sure we do address it in our schedule and consider time-critical risks in our project schedule. We need to think about the big cost uncertainties when we're building our contingency plans. We need to think about which of our stakeholders are most risky when we're designing our stakeholder communications, and so on. So what we're doing is integrating the results of the risk process into the other management processes, using the results, not having risk management only to manage risks, but using that risk information to manage the whole project, the whole portfolio, the whole business. And remembering the opportunities, remembering that we will find opportunities through the risk process that weren't found in the standard processes. So we're not just bringing bad news and say, oh, be careful, this could go wrong. You didn't think of that, did you? We're also saying, hey, good news, we found something that could really help. You haven't thought of this, you might want to include it in your standard planning. So it's really important that we have a horizontal integration of risk management results, of risk outcomes, with our overall management overall management processes. So what about the third type of integration, vertical integration? Internal integration is having an integrated risk process, so the risk process itself is managing all types of risk. Horizontal integration is looking at making sure the risk management outcomes, the risks that we identify, that information is used in our other management processes. But vertical integration is making sure that risk management is integrated at all levels across the organization. We don't have project risk management down here just doing its thing on projects, and portfolio risk management over here doing its thing on portfolios, and strategic and corporate risk management doing its thing up here with no connection between any of them. We said at the beginning, if an organization is a hierarchy of objectives, those objectives need to be coherent and aligned if the organization is going to be successful. So what we found if risk affects objectives, then we have multiple levels of risk wherever we have objectives. We have project and operational risk that affects project and operational objectives. We have program and portfolio risks that affect program and portfolio objectives. And we have strategic risks that affect our strategic objectives. But when we're thinking about how to manage those, each of those needs to be managed at the right level of the organization. So at the front line, where we're doing detailed work in our projects and operations, the project and operational risks need to be managed by our frontline staff, by our project teams and our operational groups. At the intermediate levels of programs and portfolios, the risks that affect those need to be managed by the middle management people who own those objectives. Managing the portfolio and program objectives means managing the risks that could affect them. And the top leaders of the organization, the board managers, the board directors and executive directors, are there to manage strategic risk because they're responsible for delivery of the strategic objectives. So we have multiple levels of risk because uncertainty can affect multiple levels of objectives. And we also have multiple levels of organization within the business which exists to manage the risks at each of those levels. But we don't want that done in silos. What we want is to have that done in an integrated, coherent and aligned way. So here we have these different levels of risk: project, operational, portfolio and program, strategic and corporate. We don't want them just to exist in isolation. We want to create a structure where they communicate with each other. And this is what we call enterprise risk management. Enterprise risk management manages risk across all of the levels, makes sure that we have coherence and alignment in our understanding and management of risk through using a common risk language at all levels. The same definition of risk is understood at the board level or at the operational level. To have a standard risk process that is similar at every level, so there's no great sort of glitches or misunderstandings as we pass risks across the levels. Common infrastructure, common tools that will support risk management at each level, and of course common reporting. And what we need to do is to escalate and delegate risks across those organizational levels. So if we find, whilst we're doing our project risk management, some risk that could affect the portfolio objectives or maybe even the strategic objectives, we need to be able to escalate those risks up to the level where they will be managed. And if we find a risk whilst we're doing our strategy development that could affect one of our major programs, we need to delegate that risk to the level where it could be managed most effectively. And that means we need to define risk thresholds between the different levels and then aggregate our risk exposure from the bottom up. Just like we define objectives top down and we fulfill those objectives bottom up, as we saw at the beginning, so we define our risk thresholds top down and we aggregate our risk exposure bottom up. And we find we can create this kind of communication between the levels, talking about risk and risk management in a coherent and aligned way, because we understand risk in the same way across all levels of the organization. We have a common process and we have common language, and we have a tool or we have a process, an approach which supports all of those levels. So enterprise risk management is our way of creating that vertical alignment, that vertical integration of risk management across all levels of the organization. Well, I've covered quite a lot here, haven't I? And I hope you've managed to stick with me. Let me just summarize what we've said in the last little while with a few final thoughts, and then we'll allow you to ask your questions in the Q&A box. So here are some final thoughts. Integrated risk management is the way that we're going to deliver strategic advantage. And when we say integrated, we've been talking about three types of integration. Internal integration within the risk process, an integrated approach to risk management, making sure we tackle all types of risk. Horizontal integration with other management processes within the projects or within the other parts of the organization to make sure we use the results of risk management at each level and not just keep risk management in its silo. And vertical integration across all levels of the business, so we manage risk in a coherent and aligned way across those boundaries, across the entire enterprise. Why would we do this? Well, there are benefits of each of these three types of integration. And let's just close our presentation by thinking about why it's important to have integrated risk management in this way. What are the advantages of integrating your risk process to address all types of uncertainty, including upside as well as downside? It does mean that you don't need a separate opportunity management process. We already have a risk management approach which deals with bad things. Just extending it in a simple way, using simple extensions to our existing techniques, we can also manage opportunities in the same process, which makes risk management more efficient. You don't need an opportunity process as well as a risk process. Opportunities are risks. They're positive risks, upside risks. So we get two benefits for one process. We minimize our threats and we maximize our opportunities. And that's very motivating for people to have a structured way of thinking about doing better, about including ways to work faster, smarter, cheaper, about looking for and finding things that will help us to achieve our goals in the best possible way. And it encourages us to think outside the box and be innovative, not just to follow the same old path in our standard operating procedures, but to look for the uncertainties that matter wherever they may be, and to be more innovative in the way that we approach the management of our projects and business. It does mean that we'll miss fewer opportunities. There won't be opportunities that just pass us by because we weren't looking. And if only we'd seen that, we could have captured the benefits. We actually see those opportunities in advance through the risk process, and we can catch those opportunities and turn them into benefits for our projects and businesses. And ultimately, we'll be more successful. And that, of course, is what it's all about. If we have an internally integrated risk process that tackles all forms of uncertainty, then we'll be more successful in our projects, programs, portfolios, and business, and ultimately in delivering the strategy. What about horizontal integration? Making sure that risk management comes out of the silo. We use the results of our risk process in order to inform decision making in our other management processes. It does put the right emphasis on getting good management outside of risk management, because remember, each of those project processes or other management processes exists to manage standard uncertainties, common risks. And we need to make sure as a baseline that we're getting that right, that we are managing the normal risks that are associated with doing our kind of business. So proper management is a foundation, and risk management is adding to that. So good risk management is adding value to our current processes. Getting risk management out of the silos, seeing that it's useful, it contributes to project and business success, and using those results will also help us to understand that risk management is actually really important. It demonstrates the value of managing risk right across our business. And ultimately, it improves performance, makes sure that we're more successful. And of course, that's very satisfying, not just for the rest of our business, but satisfying for those of us who are risk specialists to see that we're contributing to the way that our projects and our programs, portfolios and businesses are succeeding. We're making a difference by looking at the risks that we find in the risk process. So it's important that we inform the other management processes through our risk process. And finally, what are the advantages in vertical integration across every level of the organization through a structured approach to enterprise risk management? It helps us talk about risk, not just in a technical sense, not just in projects and operations, not just at the working level, but at every level. It gives us a common language to talk about the uncertainties that matter, and to do that across the levels in the organization. It also makes sure that risk is managed at the right level in the organization. So if at the operational level you find a strategic risk that could affect the overall business, you can't do anything about it. But if you escalate it through that vertically integrated, aligned enterprise risk management approach, you can make sure that strategic risks are understood and managed at the strategic level. If you identify at the portfolio level something that will affect one of your projects, you don't have to try and deal with it at portfolio level. You can delegate that risk through the vertically integrated ERM approach from the portfolio level to the relevant project. So we get risks owned by the people who own the objectives that would be affected. It makes sure that right at the bottom level, projects, operations, the whole working front line is connected to strategy, and make sure that we're transferring experience about risk right across the organization, helping us to learn lessons for the future, which is really important. So you'll see there are advantages in internal integration, advantages in horizontal integration, and advantages in vertical integration, all of which are worth having. So let's just ask the last question. What should we do practically? It's important that we make sure all of our objectives are aligned within the organization. We do have coherent and aligned objectives right across, from top down right to the bottom. It's important that we broaden our risk process to include opportunities and not just think about the bad things, so we get that internal integration. It's important that we use our risk information to shape decision making in other parts of our projects and organization. And it's important that we adopt a coherent approach to enterprise risk management right across the organization, not just having a set of different silos at different levels. How does risk management deliver strategic advantage? By being integrated in these three ways. Integrated risk management involves internal integration, addressing all kinds of uncertainty, both threats and opportunities, within a single integrated risk process. It involves horizontal integration, using the outcome of the risk process to help us make decisions. And it involves vertical integration, making sure that we connect all the levels of risk across the organization in a structured enterprise risk management approach. With these types of integration, internal and horizontal contribute to optimal project delivery at the lowest level, making sure that we work faster, smarter, cheaper than the competition, making sure that we're innovative and agile and alert and moving quickly. Vertical integration makes sure that within our organization, our risk management is coherent and aligned, making sure that everybody understands the risks that could affect us and making sure that we manage risk better than the competition, which ultimately not only delivers the strategy, but it delivers strategic advantage because we are working faster, smarter, cheaper, better than those who are competing with us. So if we have this integrated approach, it's not just good for projects, it's not just good for programs and portfolios, it's not even just good for strategy. It's good for the whole business in terms of making sure that we deliver what our vision in the best possible way and make sure that we actually achieve those goals. So I hope you found that interesting and useful. I hope you found some of this new and challenging. My challenge to you, we normally end these presentations with questions. I'm going to ask you the questions. Could you do some of this? If you've heard something that's new, that's something you don't currently do, can you put it into practice? None of what I've shared is blue skies academic theory. All of this, I'm a practitioner. All of this works in practice. You need to do this if you're going to gain the benefits. And as you step out of your comfort zone and try and change the way you approach risk management, you might face some barriers and some problems. What might those be? Let's be proactive about that. Let's think about how you might change your approach and your process, how you might change that mindset of your people and your stakeholders and different levels of management. How can you overcome those barriers, and what would happen if you didn't? You know, there's a saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Is risk management working sufficiently for you? If not, what are you going to do about it? You need to improve the way you manage risk to improve the way you deliver strategic advantage through your business. So if you don't do this, you'll just carry on with what you've got. If that's not okay, you need to do something different. Think about what would happen if you achieve some of these changes. And ultimately, the real question is, are you going to do something different? This might be the start of a real risk journey for you, where you extend your thinking about risk, extend your practice in risk management, extend the value that risk management delivers to your business and to your customers and clients and stakeholders. It's really important that you don't just listen to a presentation and go, yeah, that was interesting, but you do something different. Otherwise, you and I have just wasted quite a long time. And that would be a shame, wouldn't it? Well, I do hope you found that interesting and useful. Let me just finish by offering my contact details. If you want to follow up things separate from the questions and answers in the webinar, feel free to contact me directly. Take a look at the Risk Doctor website, which has lots of good resources on. Take a look at our YouTube channel, Risk Doctor Video, about 200 videos and about 16,000 subscribers. Lots of great stuff there. Feel free to use these resources to help you manage risk better. I hope you found that useful, and I wish you success in delivering strategic advantage for your business through proper risk management. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. It's really interesting and thought-provoking session as always. We are a little bit pressed for time today, but if you have posed a question, then we will come back to you offline. We'll also be sending a copy of the recording out, probably most likely tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. We do appreciate you being able to join us today. If you enjoyed the webinar, where you can find more planned webinars at www.sword-grc.com/webinars. Thank you for joining us again today, and we will see you again next time.